episode is brought to you by the University of Hawaii, College of Tropical Agriculture and Human Resources, and the Seeds of Wellbeing, or SO project. This podcast is supported by the Farm and Ranch Stress Assistance Network grant from the U.S. Department of Agriculture, National Institute of Food and Agriculture, and the Hawaii Department of Agriculture.
Aloha, welcome everyone to the SO podcast, aimed to provide educational support, information, guidance, and outreach to farmers, ranchers, and our allied agriculture producers in Hawaii. We are your hosts, Mele Oshiro and
Shannon Sand.
And today we're going to be talking with Emily Kirk, who is our SOAP Extension Agent or Sustainable Organic Agriculture Program on Kauai Island. And Emily is joining us this morning. She's going to talk to us a bit about some production stressors.
Hey, aloha, everyone. Thanks so much for having me.
Thanks for joining us, Emily. I guess maybe you can give a short description of what your position entails, because as we were just discussing, you know, SOAP is a Sustainable Organic Agriculture Program, covers a lot of different aspects of production. Yeah. So would you want to share a little bit about that and what you do?
Yeah, definitely. Sustainable and organic ag. You know, this program really started because in the past there had been a strong focus on conventional agriculture and larger scale production, and there were a number of organic producers in the state who felt like they weren't being serviced by the cooperative extension here in Hawaii. But actually, a lot of research had already been ongoing on organic practices, and so the program was started really to make sure that we were getting the word out and being able to reach all of the producers across the state. So that's why we include the organic piece specifically, but sustainable is really for everyone. And I focus primarily on edible crops, I should say, but sustainable is really broad. So
yeah, that's what I was thinking. Just the whole title is pretty broad to me. I'm like, that's a lot of breadth and depth.
Yeah, for sure. Because I mean, we all want to strive towards sustainability. So whether you're actually following organic practices or not doesn't preclude a farm from being sustainable. So there's lots of techniques that are applicable and approaches that would go for all types of production systems.
Right.
Nice.
Yeah. And today I really wanted to talk with you all a little bit about some of the work that we've been doing as a statewide team to really bring together extension folks across different disciplines to address issues of language access. And from my role with as an edible crops agent, I thought it would be a good fit to talk a little bit about some of the stressors that we see our immigrant farming community experiencing in particular.
Yeah, I would think that would be important because we have a large, actually, what most people, I think what a lot of like the general public outside of ag doesn't realize is there's a good portion of immigrants that come here and start farming, even on the mainland as well as here. But like, it's a larger population, I think, than people realize that like are not native English speakers.
Yeah, definitely. And I think a very large proportion of the farms here in Hawaii, especially are owned, operated by immigrant farmers. If you go to the farmers market, right, you can see that pretty clearly, I think.
Yeah, that's very evident. You know, my grandfather is one of them that supplies some of the farmers markets over in Hilo, and they're his wife and their friends and families that farm are all Thai. You know, so they have a good way to communicate because they can speak the language, but for agents and whatnot, it's an important thing, I think, across all aspects.
Yeah. I think the language access would be important. So what are you doing with your hui?
So the first thing that we're doing is we wanted to do some capacity building within the extension service. And part of that is even just getting an understanding, a baseline of how much knowledge our CTAHR faculty have of the issue of language access. It's actually a civil rights issue. So it falls under the category of discrimination based on national origin. So as the university, we have an obligation to make sure that our services are accessible to everyone, regardless of national origin, which means their language abilities. So part of what we're doing is first a survey and assessment within CTAHR faculty to see how much interaction people are having with we term limited English proficient stakeholders. So folks who would self-identify as speaking English less than very well. And also to see what kind of bilingual or multilingualism we have among our staff and faculty. So people who are either informally, like myself, I speak Thai, so I work a lot with the Thai producers and serve in that capacity kind of informally, but to see where those resources are within our college already, as well as any work that's been done. So I think a lot of folks have had small projects over the years doing translation, for example, of different outreach materials, and just trying to bring all those pieces together into a sort of clearinghouse and a more organized system so that, if there are new farmers on one island, we can say like, hey, there's resources we can connect you to and try to just start to reach folks a little bit better.
So after you do this, what's kind of, I guess after you do this needs assessment, I want to call it a needs assessment, but this assessment basically to see the capacity as you were talking about, like kind of what's the plan? Are you planning on translating? Because we now are getting a larger video catalog, I will say, within Extension. I know Melanie and I have contributed to it quite a bit through our own stuff the last couple of years, but like there's also lots and lots of other, like I work with lots of other groups that are doing that. So, and I know the language access thing is a big deal, as well as the ADA compliance for some of that in terms of transcription and stuff. But I also know that, and I think this is something that we've all talked about as a group together outside of this as a little bit of a conversation, is that sometimes people are not comfortable reading their native language or may not have a high reading level in their native language, but like dubbing is an option that I think has been talked about a little bit. And so can you talk a little bit more about like some of the different options and alternatives you're trying to seek out and see what we can do within Extension and what's available for CTAHR? So
yeah, that's a great question, and some really great points that you brought up. The language spoken is one thing, but literacy levels are another, as well as learning styles and preferred methods of accessing information. And I had this kind of on my list, thinking about some of the top challenges or stressors that are particular to immigrant farmers or folks with limited English proficiency, and access to information is right there at the top, because things that we really take for granted as being able to read and speak in English, that anything, if we have a question, we can just like find a way we can talk to people, we can dig into the internet. And there's all kinds of stuff available through, universities and other sources. And that's just a lot of those things are not available, even very, very basic information that you need as a producer. So for example, if you have a pest issue and you're looking to apply some kind of pest control methods or some kind of pesticide, especially.
And even if it's published in, like, let's say Indonesia or somewhere like that, I do journal review. I review journal articles for like peer reviewed journals, and I was like, they're all in English, or at least all the ones I've edited are. So I was like, I was kind of surprised when I started getting asked to do them for like other like journals, countries and journals in other countries. And I was like, they're all in English. So I was like, it's a huge information access. I would imagine it's a huge stressor for people that are not like proficient in English as a language, because it's one of the most spoken and read languages, I believe, in the world. I don't know, Emily, you'll have to correct me if I'm wrong.
Definitely, especially in the sciences and in technical publications. But you can imagine, like, as a producer, if the label on the pesticide, whether it's an organic pesticide or not, the label is the law.
Yes.
And if you can't read, or you don't even have anyone in your household who could read that label, and that's technical stuff, like it's hard to interpret for any of us, even reading in English well, it's a lot to look through. So
it's hard.
how do you comply, right? How do you keep yourself safe, first off, use a product effectively and comply with the regulations if you don't have any access to any of that. So part of what we're trying to do, we'll do the kind of internal assessment survey work, but we're also doing a stakeholder needs assessment more broadly, because there isn't good information in the state on what languages our ag producers and farm workers speak. We have a lot of anecdotal information, but we don't have any hard data from the last 15 years or more since NAS, the national.
And Hawaii has a lot of languages. So like I worked with some people from HDOA and you as well, Emily, on some other and like seeking grants and stuff previously in the past for some stuff. And I was like, it's amazing how many languages there are in the state that are spoken, it's considered like a state language,
Yeah. So to that point, I mean, we look at resources that are available from the continental US, for example. There's a lot of stuff in Spanish, which is great. We do have a lot of Spanish speakers here as well, especially working like Kona side and coffee. And there are some other resources, maybe a few in Mandarin Chinese, also Hmong and a couple other groups. But here in Hawaii, we have 14 languages that meet the criteria for an obligation from all state agencies to provide translation and resources, which is huge, right? I think
that's a lot.
In the
most
US.
other states, I think, have 3 to 6 or something in that vicinity. So we have a lot more than any other state, I'm pretty sure, close to it.
So it's a big ask. And I mean, that's on the state population overall, right? So we're trying to see what are the top, that we're wondering if the languages within the agricultural community, if there's like a slightly different ranking of those and where we can focus resources, because of course, we're very limited as well in what we can do. So tackle all 14 at once, but if we can kind of key out the top
3, top 5,
exactly, top 3 to 5 I think sounds realistic to start with, and then also to get a sense from those producers, and we'll do this with interpreters and with translation so that it can be in their own language, what types of issues they might be interested in more information about, and what are their preferred methods of that. So then we can really focus in on, pest management is like top on the list. I mentioned that because we get new pests and diseases here in Hawaii all the time.
I mean, minus when we were shut down a good bit, I felt like every day, every other day, there was a new one discovered, and it's like, okay.
Right. Yeah, exactly. So I think that's a big area, but it could be things like marketing, all kinds of other stuff as well. So then we can kind of focus in and see, well, we can make videos. We can also do in-person, one-on-one kind of technical advising and farm visits, organize workshops, organize farmer field days, all of these things, with interpretation and translated resources as appropriate to make sure that we're making that information accessible.
Right. I'm guessing this isn't happening like in the next 3 to 6 months. This sounds like a long-term plan that you're working on. So like, I'm assuming that it sounds like the internal assessment, I don't know, I want to call it an assessment. I know that's not the right term, but is what you're starting with. And so like end of day, is to basically kind of ID like the top 3 to 5, you think, and then offer resources and translation services. So I'm going to ask a question, because as an economist and someone who has done a lot of work with historical data, is the thought to resurvey every few years after the program gets started and we figure out the available needs? Because I can picture the amazing thing about Hawaii is the population shifts quite a bit, and actually quite rapidly compared to some other states, in terms of, people migrating here and migrating out and back and forth. So I'm like, I can imagine that honestly, it might change in 10 years.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good question. And for sure, it's very dynamic.
Yeah.
So this is, to your first point, this is long-term work for sure. And I mean, I see this is something that I've been focused on since I started here, and could see being a key focus because it's such a large portion of our stakeholders.
Oh yeah.
I could see this being, ongoing work for the rest of my
Depending
career.
on the commodity. I think there are some commodities that have mostly English speaking, I would say. And then there are other commodities where it's definitely not predominantly, like, English is not spoken as their native language. So, you know.
Yeah, and it depends on where you are in the state also. And there's a difference between the farm owners and farm workers in some cases. But what I'd love to see is that NAS, the National Agricultural Statistics Service, who had previously been collecting this data, I think the most recent we have for Hawaii is 2005 or 2006.
It's a long time ago. I know that. Yeah,
I would love for them to take that mantle up again, and the Hawaii Department of Agriculture, because that's their kuleana, right?
Right.
So we can do our best to fill in the gaps in the meantime. And I think that then we can work forward, plus all of the kind of piecemeal or ongoing program evaluation and needs assessment and feedback mechanisms that we have in extension when we're doing work with producers anyway. That will continue to inform our work. But the big push to do a statewide survey and just to get a little bit of the lay of the land.
Right on.
I think that, we can do that now. And then I would love to see the other agencies pick that up again.
Yeah, so important. Yeah, I think that's a very important part that you're putting into the producers, especially the ag producers, to ensure that that information is there. So I have a question. So in the short term, then, Emily, I mean, is language access is going to be a lot, like you said, a long-term plan, and it is going to be very dynamic because things are going to change probably as you go through, right? Because the project is going to be so long-term that you're going to have to adjust probably halfway through, and that's just how it goes sometimes. But in the short term, what kind of resources is out there currently for our what do you call multilingual producers out there that can help them with sort of things like you're talking about, for pesticide treatments? I mean, do any of these companies offer their guidelines and their manuals in alternative languages already, or is that something, that we could? So
that's an interesting one. I'm really excited for Emily to speak on, because that's kind of it's a tricky one.
Yeah. Well, so for one thing, I mean, the kinds of resources and things that are available, we do have a lot of resources that we've translated through CTAHR. So for folks who have good literacy in their own language, we have a number of the top languages, and we have many documents that are translated regarding pesticide safety and food safety. And the kind of clearinghouse for that, the website's being revitalized at the moment, but it's the LIFE program website. So that's the LIFE is Local and Immigrant Farmer Education Program that Jerry Sugano had led for many years. And then it was the grant funding kind of had run out.
Right.
Jerry, has transitioned to a different position now as county administrator on Oahu. And so I had reached out and say, I'd like to take this on to kind of revitalize it. So that's one place to go for as a very kind of basic level of access of information. But the other thing is that a lot of the agencies, so for example, NRCS, right, or FSA, so those are USDA agencies that have a mandate to serve farmers and are under the same civil rights compliances. So they have telephonic interpreter services. So they can work with producers regardless of national origin and language to access their services. And then, the other part of the question.
So with the labels, because with the label is the law. So there's I know there's some issues because it has to go through approval in the other language. So it's like a whole rigmarole is my understanding.
Yeah. So
maybe that's not the appropriate term, but it's a whole lot of like processing and paperwork for people to get it through.
Right. So I would call out the EPA right here. You can reach out, they could reach out to individual companies to see, do they happen to have this label translated? And even if it is translated, it can't just pull like that product's label from another country. It has to be the specific local
label. Has to be EPA approved. Right. Yeah, it's kind of one of those things that it's very much a EPA political thing. Because I was like, when we started working on this, full disclosure, I work on this with Emily so much. So I was like, I was really surprised to see, because I was like, you have these different companies, whether they're the ones that make like organic or non-organic products, and like it has to all go through EPA approval. I was like, but it has to, even if they sell it in other countries and have that country's EPA approval, and so it's in a native language and appropriately labeled, it still has to go through. And again, that's a whole additional expense for like companies to go through. It's a whole thing. I mean, yeah.
Yeah, so I would call out the EPA on this one, again, as being an agency of the federal government. They are obligated under the Civil Rights Act, which includes not discriminating based on national origin, which includes language access and providing access to information, upon request. And I see this very often, that a lot of the obligations under these kinds of things are basically being passed off or passed down to individuals versus the coming from that central government.
Well, and then I guess it would add an additional stressor then, because if you're translating, then the question becomes, are you liable? I'm an economist. I think of a lot of things in terms of like risk and things like that. So I was like, that's a thing you need to think about. Although not to add another stressor to people, because there's already a lot of those.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah, but I mean, that's a great question that I should probably look into. Because
I went to like a pesticide training, and that was one that a lot of them had questions about, because we were having a conversation about specifically the Pacific Islands with us and Guam and some of the other like Micronesian and other islands. And that like, that's like a real question. I was like, if you translate this, are you potentially liable if someone doesn't use it? Right. I mean. So.
Right. And I mean, are we even legally allowed?
That was the other question.
Or a translation service. Are they even legally allowed to translate something that like from the EPA that is so
my understanding is no, but again, I would tell people to check with the EPA themselves to find out before even trying to do anything like that. So,
and we're not doing that. We're not translating pesticide labels.
No, and I think again, it has to do with the EPA has a lot of paperwork you have to go through to get things through. It's a whole thing. I'm like,
but that's good for producers to know that if they need this, that's the contact they need to go through is the EPA.
Yeah, honestly, if a solid like set of associations really pushed it, they could probably get some of that to change pretty easily. Or a good group of producers, really wanted to push it. It is it's an issue in the state, especially, where we have so many languages.
Yeah. And so I think that's just, again, an example of where, if we had this conversation and explain to, you imagine, so you're an immigrant, maybe you've been here for 5 years, you got a lease on some land and you're trying to start a farm. And then all of a sudden it's all of this stuff, right? All of these additional things in addition to how difficult and stressful farming is anyway, right? There's this whole other layer of somebody telling you that you have to do this thing, but not giving you a way to be able to do it.
Understand it. Yeah. I mean,
so access to information is huge. I think access to services is another one I kind of alluded to in many cases. Things like, FSA programs and RCS. The folks that I've worked with here on Kauai are really good about trying to be accessible and very patient and do the outreach. But in many cases, the farmers don't know that they even exist, right?
Yeah, I think that's a lot of it is that they're unaware, and I think we should just recognize that we are also speaking this in English. So,
for sure. No, we're totally talking to ourselves here. Like this is not going to reach producers, but I think the idea is again about raising awareness of the additional types of stress that immigrant farmers might be facing, and then thinking about ways that we could, even on small ways, like if it's your neighbor, for example, like maybe mention NRCS to them, tell them what that is.
And that they have like telephonic interpreters available to them. And so like, that means that eQuip is an opportunity that a producer could use if they want to take advantage of the eQuip program and get some additional equipment. I always think of equip as equipment. So, or, like if they need something, I'm like, take advantage of that. And especially with like current funding rollout for agriculture right now, it's really good.
Yeah.
Like, check with FSA and NRCS and some of the different groups, the different federal funding agencies. I mean, especially for Hawaii right now, I was having a conversation with another economist, and I was like, there's money available. And I was like, take advantage of it if you're a producer. It doesn't come around that often. So alleviate some of your stress and get some of those things you need, Yeah.
The transportation cost reimbursement, they have a lot of great programs that, it's a little bit of extra paperwork, but, it's extra cash back in your pocket as well. And then beyond the USDA programs, let your neighbors and your friends know that the extension
that's the big thing.
That you can get technical advising and support, and that pretty much everything we do is free.
At least
we're not regulatory.
Like, extension.
And I would say most agents, or almost all agents on the island, even if it hasn't, like I'm a livestock agent, but people ask me questions about other things that I might not have the answer, but I bet you I can find an agent that can help you,
that
and
is the key, right?
We just know,
like that.
Know who we can direct you to or the resources. So, I mean, and Emily now here talking about the language barriers that we have with producers and whatnot, she is a contact for that. So if you know someone that's having those types of issues and need some help with it, reach out to Extension, reach out to Emily.
But I think it's important, like make sure your neighbors are aware of some of these resources. If you can, your neighbors, your friends, your family, because we know like we're all related to different people and stuff. I was like, it's one of those things like, if you can make them aware that like, hey, these services are available, you can qualify for this money. And it's a little extra paperwork, like Emily said, but was like, at the end of the day, it's also an extra little chunk of change in your pocket, which you got to decide if it's worth it. But oftentimes, it can be. So,
And if you've gone through the process once for some of these programs, when they come up again, it'll be easier the next time, for you to apply. So,
for sure.
Definitely take advantage of those things.
Yes, especially because I'm telling you, there is money out there for Hawaii right now, is my understanding after talking to some people from like FSA and NRCS. So if you're in Hawaii, you're listening to this, you're a producer, go see your FSA person, or like email or call your NRCS person and see like what's available for you right now. And some places are like in drought. So I was like, check it out.
And if you're listening to this and you're a producer who has workers on your farm, have limited English proficiency, consider reaching out to us too. Let us know. We have resources available that can help with farm worker training and things like that, for example. And also I'd say if you're listening to this and you're a landowner and giving leases out to immigrant farmers, talk to your tenant farmers. Let them know that there are these resources available through USDA programs, through us, and that we really want to do everything we can to make sure that we can keep people farming, and also encourage pathways for new farmers to come and start up in the state, because I think we all know how important that is for the economy and also for food security here.
I think we've learned that as a very valuable lesson in the last couple of years. I really hope, I mean, we'll see how it goes over the next few, but I'm like, I think the food security is a big thing here, especially. Especially for us outer island folks, because we felt some interesting times over the last couple of years, to say the least. So,
Well, thank you so much,
Kauai.
Emily.
You had way fewer shipments at certain times. So,
I know. You guys are always a little bit more short than we are, I think, here. So I feel for them out that way. But thank you, Emily, for joining us today.
Yes.
Taking some time out to kind
Mele.
of share.
Thank you, Shannon.
Yeah.
Thank you, Mele.
Thank you, Emily.
Yeah, we hope our listeners gain some knowledge about some of the translation services and resources that are out there and where you can find them. And if not, reach out to Emily, or even to Shannon and I. We can always direct you to the right person, or at least try to. And also, listeners, be sure to visit our Seeds of Wellbeing website and our YouTube channel listed in the show notes.
Yep. And for additional information about this topic, see the links provided in the show notes. Thanks for listening to the So Podcast.
Yeah, before we go, show some love for your favorite podcast by leaving us a review on Apple Podcasts or anywhere you listen to this podcast, and then stay tuned for next month. Mahalo for listening. Ahui ho.
Ahui ho.
Aloha.
Aloha.